It's just amazing to me how if you do come across in that way as open and caring and really putting your customer first, which I know, as you said, everyone kind of says that and everyone says about being close to the customer, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually do it, it's amazing that what you actually get back and the information that people share with you, because they're looking for you to kind of help them.
Hey, I'm Stuart Balcombe, and this is the DTC Voice of the Customer podcast. Join me as I go behind the scenes with top D2C e-commerce operators to understand how they leverage the voice of their customers to drive sustainable growth. We'll be chatting about how they capture thoughts and feedback from customers, who owns the customer journey, what tools they're using, and how they translate what they know about customers into product and marketing that resonates and drives revenue. Whether you want actionable tactics for capturing the voice of your own customers, or just want to see how other top brands are doing things, this is the podcast for you. Staying close to your customer is one of those things that's easy to say, but often hand-waved at in practice. Today, I'm joined by founder and CEO of Form Nutrition, Damian Soong, to chat about how they bridge that gap and build meaningful relationships with their customers.
My name's Damian. I'm a CEO, co-founder at Form. Form is a brand of plant-based nutrition, really built around the whole belief that you can be the best version of yourself while being mindful of others. We have a range of plant-based proteins for your body, nootropic cognitive supplements for your mind. We're a B Corporation, the first UK protein brand to achieve that. So we're joining forces with amazing brands like Patagonia and Tom's and Ben & Jerry's in the US, who are all kind of committed to using business as a force for good, which is something that's very kind of dear to us. You can find us online, obviously on our website, formnutrition.com, and at various cool stockists across the UK and the US, from Planet Organic and Selfridges and Net-a-Porter through to Equinox Hotel in New York City.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that you have a fantastic mission, and that's really something that sort of drives everything that you do at Form. So I know that one thing, so you have this mission that is, you can do business and do good at the same time. But there's another component which I think is really interesting, sort of from your website, something that you talk about a lot, is that everybody can be the best version of themselves, and that there's sort of this individual betterment that is a big part of the brand as well. So one of the things that we are going to talk about today is sort of how do you go about understanding individual customers? How do you use that to drive the business forward? So what it sort of actually has to go into helping people make progress and better themselves from a business perspective?
Well, I mean, to attack it from the beginning, I guess the reason that we focus on performance and the reason that we kind of talk about empowering the individual and being the best version of yourself is we really want to kind of recognize that performance is very individual. So what performance is for you is going to be different from what performance is for me, compared to an athlete, compared to a busy mother, compared to a student or an entrepreneur. So we wanted to kind of wrap all of that up in a vision and values that kind of made sense to everyone. In terms of, in data and how we go about using that or learning that from our customers is really by being very close to the customer, by being very open and available to be talked to. So that's through various channels, whether it's our customer service people or social media people. So we have like Natalia and Izzy looking after social media. We have Vanessa and Mel looking after customer service, and they're constantly getting feedback from customers, both positive and negative, which is telling us all about loads of different data points about how people are using products, what their goals are and objectives. And then there's like the traditional obvious things as well, like surveys and all this kind of stuff. So, there's so much that we can dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting though that you mentioned that one of the ways that you help people find their individual progress and make sort of individual betterment is by being closer to the customer, which I feel like is something that a lot of people say, but in practice is much harder to do, but also something that sort of gets hand waved at. And
customers sense very quickly as a brand or as a company if there's a real connection, if there's a real sense of caring. I think by virtue, it's amazing sometimes just the things that people feel comfortable telling us, right? Really kind of personal things about their own work or personal life or diet or health situation, things that sometimes you probably not normally even want to tell your doctor, right? It's just amazing to me how if you do come across in that way as open and caring and really putting your customer first, which I know, as you said, everyone kind of says that and everyone says about being close to the customer, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually do it, it's amazing that what you actually get back and the information that people share with you, because they're looking for you to kind of help them. And, everyone has an opinion on nutrition, for example, and everyone or the kind of people that are our customers are trying to better themselves one way or another. And so everyone's looking for help to, as you said, or as we say, to be the best version of themselves.
So you mentioned a number of channels there. So you mentioned customer support. There's people having conversations with customers all the time. You got social media, and then you've got sort of more, I guess, proactive or sort of outbound methods of capturing insights from customers. What's sort of the typical breakdown of what sort of volume do you have through each of those channels in terms of just sort of raw data? I know as soon as we start talking about data, you get into a whole discussion about, do we have enough data? Is this significant enough to make decisions on? What's sort of the breakdown of where you're getting most of your feedback? And how do you go about taking sort of the raw inputs that you're getting and sort of actually turning that into something meaningful that you can learn from?
So, there's two main channels. Well, three actually. There's social media, there's a customer service interface, and then there's email. And we would use all one, two, or three of those to basically try and get hard data, mostly in the form of survey information. That would be the one kind of set of hard data that we get customers giving us. But then also remember, we've been in business for over 3 years now. So we have a big kind of data set just of customer behavior on our website in terms of purchases and so on and everything like that. So there's a lot we can do just in terms of, standard kind of RFM analysis and then overlaying that with other information and data and so on. So we use mainly that set of actual customer behavior data and then overlay it with things that we might kind of grab from surveys and things like that.
Gotcha. So when you say hard data, what do you mean by that? Are you talking sort of quantitative, like multiple choice response? You can sort of actually put this many people said.
Yeah, so in like a customer survey type question, what's your sleep like? What are your diet choices and why? So just understanding what's been really useful for us is understanding the customer on that kind of level, what their interests are, what their usual kind of demographic information and things like reasons for their diet choices and interests and, beliefs and so on. And then using that with the data that we have from their actual behavior on our website in terms of like the products that they've purchased or the pages that they've visited or, the articles and so on that they might be interested in on our content platform.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one thing that, as soon as I sort of read this, everybody, and you said this right at the start too, is that everybody's definition of progress and of sort of bettering themselves is different, right? Depending on who you are and depending on sort of what your goals are. How do you go about segmenting out sort of the different groups? I imagine it must be a good number. I think I've seen before you have, language that's whether you're a bodybuilder or a ballerina, which are pretty vastly different sort of groups. How do you go about segmenting out sort of what you learn about each group?
Yeah, so what we've done is firstly, we do a pretty traditional RFM type analysis on the actual historical data that we have. So recency, frequency, and monetary value of all customers. But then what we do is we tie that up to actual data on customers that they've told us through surveys and so on. So what their interest might be, whether they're a ballerina or a bodybuilder, as you say. So then when we start to overlay the two, we can done the RFM analysis. So we split out different segments like that. But then we're able to overlay and say, okay, look, what we call our champions are mostly, vegan bodybuilders or whatever they might be. And, our high value customers are mostly this type of person. What's actually been really helpful for us is then you can start to build up personas. I know everyone does personas and so on. But what we found really valuable and what I think is really important is most people do personas and they imagine what their customer is. And to be honest, that's never correct because who I first imagined the form customer to be when we first started is quite different to actually who they've transpired to be. And that's a good thing because it's kind of organic and that's how a business and a brand kind of grows. But this goes back to being close to your customers and how that's really helpful is because when we break out these segments, we then create personas. And what we're kind of working to do now is to create these personas based on actual real customers that we know. So it's much easier rather than us invent an imaginary customer who we think is all these people, we could say, okay, well, actually this group of champions, that's like Stuart that we know, he's into this and that and podcasts and so on or what have you. And this other guy is like Tim, who's a personal trainer that we know, and then when we can all relate to actual real people who are representative of these segments or personas in our business, then it's much easier for us in everything that we do to be writing a piece of content for Stuart or to be doing a promotion that's targeted to Tim or whatever it might be. That's what I've found kind of most helpful is actually tying it back to real people.
I love that. It makes it that much more tangible, that much more real, right? That you can especially if you have, customer support people or other people in the company who are actually talking to customers, like they've probably talked to Tim, right? And they probably can sort of immediately think of other people like Tim, sort of based on the persona. So to sort of dig in on that sort of piece a little bit, what goes into that persona? How is that structured in terms of how do you communicate that? And sort of, I guess from the beginning, like, are you specifically doing sort of capturing data with the idea that like, we're going to capture this so that it can go in the persona here, we're going to capture that so it can go in the persona there? Or like, how does that persona sort of come together?
It's kind of quite organic and it evolves because you start off by thinking, these would be the interesting thing to know about our customers. So we obviously started with the basics. You have like age, sex, location, for example. Then you start to think about jobs and income. Then you start to think about interests. And for us as a nutrition company, diet choice is really important and the reasons for that as well. So whether someone's into sustainability or whether they just want to look good or whether they're competing for an event, these are all kind of different things that tailor our kind of offering in terms of content and emails and ultimately kind of product as well. And then we'll evolve because the surveys that we do of customers will continually update them. We'll add new questions. We'll remove stuff as well because sometimes something isn't particularly useful and it's not something we want to. I think surveys and stuff work well when they're really concise and you're really not, making people spend 10 minutes competing something or doing I think the worst thing is when there's kind of quizzes for personalized products. And that I think it's a little bit disingenuous because at the end of it, you're not really getting a personalized product. You're getting one of the 2 or 3 products just recommended for you based on a very simple, I wouldn't even call it an algorithm. It's just a tiny bit of logic. So we've not really done any of that. We've just tried to, be honest that we want to get to know our customers better and like be able to offer you better products and information. And, I think most people are happy with that.
It is amazing to me, and sort of a recurring surprise, I guess, when you ask and care about customers, it's amazing how much you get sort of shared in return. Because, ultimately, they want the product to be better for them, right? Like they have some goal that they're trying to...
Exactly. You always get people that are, concerned about what you're going to do with the data. You have to have proper safeguards in place and so on. But, by and large, people with a brand that they trust anyway are very, very happy. Like I say, and especially in the nutrition space, people love talking about their nutrition. We used to have real-time chat on the website. We actually had to stop it because we just couldn't resource it enough to have people there spending sometimes half an hour chatting to someone about things that are going on in their nutrition. So we have to try and do that over email now, which I think is an easier channel for us to manage in terms of workload as well.
Got it. So when we were talking about the personas and sort of what goes into them there, you mentioned a number of things that are sort of the what, right? Like the demographic type information, like name, sex, location, occupation, those kinds of things. But there's also some things that are sort of the why, right? Like I'm training for this event, I'm training or I'm trying to recover better, whatever it might be. How do you sort of pass out those things? Are they sort of open text, open response in a survey? Like how do you sort of go about pulling that out? Because it's
like something like the activities that you're interested in. So it might be cycling, running, training with weights. They would be like multiple selects, so people could like select them. And then in terms of data, what we would do is we'd look at each of the RFM segments that we'd created and say, okay, this segment over indexes in cycling, but this other segment over indexes in weights, and really attack it that way. Yeah, open-ended text is tricky to deal with from a data point of view. We do have that, but it's more resource intensive to actually go through it. What we're starting to look at now, like it's really interesting to start to look at kind of natural language processing and things like that. And even just things like sentiment analysis is really interesting in terms of open text, but not something we've really got to grips with yet.
Gotcha. And in terms of sort of, like you say, multiple selects is much easier to process from a data perspective. How much data sort of total are you looking at processing if that's something that you're comfortable sharing?
To be honest, I couldn't tell you in terms of like gigabytes or what have you, or lines, but we've been around for like 3 years. There's a lot of customer transactions. There's a lot of data of movements on the website and so on. So it's a big undertaking. We do all of it in like Python, Google Colabs. We're starting to look at things like Snowflake and stuff like that, which is cool. But yeah, at the moment, it's all manageable for us with just like Google Colabs. Well, we find it a nice way of operating because it's like really nice to structure like a Python worksheet like that and then actually roll it out to other people in the business and they can just click run and it can all be nicely documented and so on. So yeah, there's loads we can do.
Got it. So in terms of, I know you mentioned that, you have customer support people involved in talking to customers. Who sort of overall owns responsibility for staying close to the customer? And what are the different roles that are involved in making sure that you know what's going on with your customers?
Yeah, so I think we all try and be responsible for it ourselves in terms of having that kind of like data first mindset, in terms of if we make a decision, it's got to be based on some data or to try and prove or disprove some kind of hypothesis. So everyone's kind of responsible for pulling that in or coming up with ideas from their various parts of the business. But ultimately, it would be Brian, who's our kind of head of growth / data scientist, who would pull it all together and give it kind of shape and structure.
Got it. And that's sort of something that he's, like you mentioned, that he's sort of sharing those analyses out with the teams, that everybody sort of has that shared context.
Yeah, and we're very lucky with him because he's like been around a lot of data people in the past. And what's difficult sometimes is like actually converting data and the analysis into something that's really actionable. And what I think Brian's really good at, and why we love having him around, is like that he can take it and convert it into something that we can all understand and actually action. So it's not kind of like obtuse insights and statistics. It's a lot of statistics with actionable insights, which is the key point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Let's sort of talk about that a little more. So how does this sort of customer understanding and being close to the customer, what does that sort of bleed through into in terms of the actual tasks and the things that you're working on the business? Is like there's a long list of areas where you have interactions with customers that you potentially can improve or do new things with. What's sort of some examples of learnings that you've got from the data that you've been able to apply to have an impact on the business?
Well, there's a lot of obvious things, like it informs kind of new product strategy was one thing. It informs obviously a lot of website design. It informs a lot of content. So we have Richard, our editor of Inform, which is our content platform, and he will use a lot of the analysis that Brian's done to inform content that he's always writing or commissioning pieces that are speaking to one of our target kind of personas or demographics. And then they would be the key things. Also, well, I guess email marketing and retention, that's one big thing as well. So we try and make sure all emails and offers are tailored to the right people based on what we know about them, so that everyone's getting something that's much more useful. And I think that's important to keep up open rates and to lower kind of churn from your email lists. And that's something that's like really important to us as well, because we still find, I think email is still the most important channel in terms of communicating with the customer.
It's sort of impacting everything from the actual content that you're using to the targeting of specific campaigns, specific emails. And you mentioned that website design as well.
Yeah, and obviously like digital marketing as well. So we do a fair bit of Facebook, Instagram ads, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of data obviously coming in from all of that. That can drive you a bit crazy. But yeah, it informs a lot of that as well. So yeah, we try and like everything we do, we try and make sure it's either got to be something that is based on some hard data or some kind of hypothesis that we want to test. Or, sometimes it's not based on any data and it's got something that's really kind of true to our values and just something that we want to do, and might not necessarily be a big commercial thing, but it's just something that's right for brand or for customer in another way.
Got it. So that was going to be my next question, actually, was, at that times when you go against the data or intentionally make a decision to do something that's not based on data. But
I think that is a bit like innovation in general, right? It's like you can't only innovate based on data or based on what your customers tell you. It has to be a balance. You have to lead somewhat, right, as well. There has to be some kind of direction you're going in. Because sometimes if all you do is rely on data or all you do is rely on your customers, it's kind of like a regression to the mean. It's much better, in my view, to be going in different directions and maybe polarizing things a little bit rather than just regressing, like I say, to the mean and ending up with something really average and mediocre. So that's an important thing to bear in mind also.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's really easy to just sort of end up in the middle and not actually have an opinionated stance that really resonates with people. So one thing,
I think all the kind of the finest things in the world, from classical music to art to wine, they're all quite polarizing. Classical music, for example, people either love it or hate it, but everyone kind of agrees it's like in many ways the pinnacle of musical achievement, right? And you would not argue that, I don't know, Justin Bieber, it's like you could go to that average kind of like 3 out of 5 star type music or I'd much rather have like some music that half people think 5 and the other half think 1. That kind of polarizing is much more important, I think.
Yeah, sort of on that topic, what's the sort of the most surprising thing that you found in the data that maybe went sort of totally against what you were expecting or maybe wouldn't have come to otherwise?
I don't know, actually. I wouldn't say I'm easily surprised. I'm trying to think. I mean, it surprised me in the beginning how quickly women grew as a segment for us. We always thought and developed Form as a very kind of gender neutral, balanced brand. We didn't want it to be male. We didn't want it to be female. We just wanted it to be a brand that kind of spoke to, a set of people and values. So it surprised me, women, 70% of our customer base, which I wasn't expecting, but maybe that's kind of obvious now. Looking back, women are the fastest growing segment of like protein users, for example. But other things in the data, I think things that surprised me is like always buying patterns surprised me. You always think that people would buy on some kind of regular basis, like 1 bag a month or 2 bags a month or something like that. But things always surprise us in the data. We have customers that will buy like 20 bags at once and then disappear and then come back and buy another 20 bags. It's kind of just weird behaviors like that, which obviously must make sense to them in some reason, in some way. I'm not sure. Maybe it's like about traveling or something. So that's always interesting to kind of dig into a little bit deeper. I guess sometimes it's like not strange behaviors, but behaviors that are just not what you'd expect to see for what's a pretty standard consumable product.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that because you've done the analysis, because you've sort of broken out these personas and the segments, you can see the differences in some of this behavior between those things. Do you run or do you organize around each, I want to call them jobs, but around sort of each goal that a person has? Like, how do you organize around the data, or do you organize around the data from sort of a planning perspective?
I'm not sure, really. It was not something that I would kind of have thought about. I mean, the thing that we do in terms of planning, in terms of operational planning, managing stock and things like that, that's a very kind of data intensive thing to try and forecast that based on past behaviors and trends and so on. Even something simple like seasonality is like quite a difficult thing to get right in terms of predictive models. But that's kind of what we're looking at there.
It's really interesting, the sort of trade-off's the wrong word, but this sort of the difference between what are the things that we need a lot of data for and what are the things that are a little more intuitive or a little more sort of, I guess, softer than sort of the hard data. But being close to your customers, as you said right at the start, sort of bring this full circle is sort of the underlying thing that helps with everything. Actually, I guess in the spirit of being close to your customers, what's sort of something that you would say that you and Form sort of does in that vein that's maybe different than what others might expect from a closeness to customer perspective? Is there something that you're sort of particularly stand out at in that regard, do you think?
I think just by being approachable, by being grateful and being kind of honest, I think that's kind of picked up very, very easily by people. They kind of sniff that out. And is that authenticity is important. So, the whole aspect of the giving program, the charity work that we do with the Form Feeding Fund, for example, that's a very important thing to have, is like the authenticity behind the brand. Because I think people are so much more in tune now with the values and what brands are actually doing behind the scenes. So that's very important for us. And is that it all kind of helps to build trust. That's the ultimate thing that you want with your customers, right? To be trusted.
Yeah, you mentioned that. And that has knock-on effects too, right? Beyond just starting that relationship on the right foot with customers. You mentioned this before as well. That sort of helps you get deeper responses, more thoughtful responses when you are looking for new insights from customers.
100%.
Okay, to sort of start to wrap things up here, this has been really great. I'd love to get in sort of in the weeds of all the different things you're thinking about when it comes to understanding your customers. For those who may be sort of data-centric or as close to their customers as you guys are at Form, what would be sort of the first step that you would recommend to sort of make a move in this direction? Obviously, you mentioned the brand having an impact on the way that customers interact with you and sort of the expectation that you set with customers. But for somebody who just looking to take the first step, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, in terms of data or in terms of brand?
Yeah, let's do pretty broad subjects, right? In terms of getting closer to their customers and starting to have a better sort of finger on the pulse and sort of better understanding of...
Well, I think to be able to have the kind of permission to get closer to the customer from the customer, you have to be a brand that they love and respect and have trust for, as we kind of touched on before. So I think first of all, that you have to get that kind of bit in order, because if you're not that kind of brand and then you start asking your customers for essentially favors, then the response, I don't think, is going to be very, very great. So assuming you have your kind of brand in order and it's, has a real affinity with your customer base, then I guess it's just a question of like the really simple stuff and then building up from there. Even just knowing all your customers, most people don't even know, well, not most people, but many people would not be able to easily report on, I don't know, even like the age breakdown of their customers or the zip code breakdown or postcode breakdown. So start with those very basic things. And then it's a question of layering up from there. So whatever kind of makes sense for your brand or business, for us, it's very much about interest and goals and that kind of stuff. But, for a different type of product or brand, it could be something completely different.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's the advice to start small and then build up is really great, because it's so easy to be overwhelmed by, all the possibilities of the things that you can do.
There's no point asking people like 1,000 questions if you haven't got like the process in place to be able to deal with that data and present it. You can ask as many questions as you want, right? But until you have a system built that could take that information in and then spit something out, you're not going to be able to kind of do much actionable with it. So I think probably focus on simple first, little kind of demographic insights, customer insights, and build a system that's able to work with that, and then start to put more into it. Because once you've got a working system, then it's just a question of, putting more and more in and gaining more insights.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And ultimately, it doesn't matter how many insights or how many, like you say, how many questions you ask and how many answers you get, if you're not able to turn that into business impact on the other side. Right.
Yeah, and don't ask for things that aren't going to be actionable for you. Like there's a million other things that we could ask our customers, but if it's not like what color is your hair, right? That's not important to us, right? But if you're, I don't know, some kind of hair product customer, then a hair product business, then it probably is, right? So you just got to ask for things that are relevant for you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been really fun. I know you mentioned it at the top of the conversation, but for those who are maybe in the market or just interested in learning more about the Form brand and the mission, where should they go to catch up with you or to catch up with the brand?
Yeah, so website's formnutrition.com, and all major social channels, our handles, just Form Nutrition as well. And you can always email me, Damian@formnutrition.com. Find me on Twitter as well. I think I'm Damian_Soong. But yeah, reach out. Always happy to connect and chat about all this kind of like nerdy stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the D2C Voice of the Customer podcast. If you like this content, I'd love for you to leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, or reach out to Damian and tell him how much you like this interview. There's also a whole lot more coming up in this feed, so to find the complete show notes, more episodes, and our newsletter, head over to notnps.com/pod.